Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Vecchio, specializing in home care, downsizing, and the senior living industry. Thank you for tuning in on a snowy Sunday. Coming up on the first half of the show, Caring for the Caregiver. We're going to hear from caregiving specialist Claire Webster about her own personal story of caregiving and the challenges that came along with it. And we'll hear how Claire turned her caregiving experience to the benefit of thousands of other caregivers. And I'm also going to be talking to an Israeli social worker supporting victims of the war. Ex-Montrealer and clinical social worker Joy Frankel was assigned to the temporary morgues on October 7th when the war broke out to support families and next of kin. She continues to support families on an ongoing basis. Wait until you hear what she has experienced these past 2 months. And I'm going to wrap it up by talking to Mike Grenier. Mike is the executive director of A Horsetail Rescue, which is a refuge for horses, including retired SPVM and Calèche horses. They're now supporting 13 horses through a volunteer network of over 400 people. We'll hear all about it, including their upcoming fundraiser to raise needed funds to keep the rescue going. All right. Now, did you know that almost 1 in 4 Canadians are caregivers? Almost all of them are unpaid, and they were most likely thrust into the role of caregiver with no formal training. It can be stressful, exhausting, and overwhelming. Well, I'm joined in studio with caregiving specialist Claire Webster. Claire is the founder and ambassador of the McGill Dementia Education Program and the founder and president of Caregiver Crosswalk, wonderful consulting to families in needs. Claire, welcome back to Life Unrehearsed.
Thanks, Matt. So happy to be in studio with you.
Yes, thank you for making the trek down in the snow. So I really do appreciate you joining me here on such an important topic. For our listeners that may not know your story, can you tell us a little bit of a background of you and your story?
Well, I was really, caregiving's been in my DNA ever since I was born, I guess. As an only child, I witnessed the toll that caregiving took on my mother, who looked after my father, who had multiple health ailments. And not long after he passed away, which was in 2005, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at the age of 74. And I was part of that sandwich generation caregiver that had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a career in a totally different field. And I was not provided with any information, education about my mother's illness other than good luck, Mrs. Webster. And as a result of not being provided with the information and education, it really resulted in the lack of quality of care that she would not receive. I did not know how to navigate the illness, let alone the healthcare system, and it really took a toll on my own health and well-being, as well as having a ripple effect on my family. And I realized later on that, I became very involved as a volunteer in this area. And I realized, as compared to other illnesses, when people are receiving a diagnosis of any form of dementia, rarely is the medical community providing them with information about the disease. So I really felt that I wanted to become a navigator and help other families understand the importance of education and how to take care of a loved one.
Well, and you're speaking from the heart, personal. It was a rough ride for you, and I think for many of the caregivers out there today, whether it's for dementia or any other form of caregiving, I think they can relate, and many people can relate because you're not formally trained in it, right? You're dealing with it as it comes to you, and you're in that role because you love a loved one, but it can be a real trying time on the caregiver psychologically as well.
Well, and also you don't self-identify as a caregiver. You feel that, I'm the son, the daughter, the husband and wife, and it's my responsibility to do this, right? But you don't see yourself as a caregiver. And, depending on the illness for which you're looking after the person, all of a sudden, it moves from just being this cognitive illness to now you're physically caring for somebody. You're helping them get dressed. You're helping bathing them. You're helping them to prepare their meals. So you just becomes this role that you weren't necessarily, you never signed up for in a marriage, because sometimes it could become very intimate, some of the responsibilities that people have to take on.
As our population ages, Claire, we're seeing cracks in our healthcare system. We're hearing it all the time in the news. We both see it firsthand. I'd like to say it's getting better, but it is challenging, and I don't know if it's going to get better simply because of the population aging. And one thing that you are constantly stressing is that you really do have to advocate for yourself and for your loved ones, don't you?
Yeah, you have to be very proactive. You can't just sit back and say, "Oh, I'm going to wait for that CLSC social worker to call me," or "I'm going to wait." A lot of people when I work with families, I say, you need to become educated as much as possible. You need to start contacting your CLSC or going to see the doctor. Many people will say to me, "Oh, well, we're not there yet," right? And it often takes a crisis for people to be there, and you don't want to be in a crisis, especially in this healthcare environment. We heard last week in the news that the waiting list to receive home care support or to go into a long-term care has doubled, right? And so the people that will be most successful in receiving support are the ones that will be proactive and polite. Okay, because the healthcare workers are definitely overburdened, overwhelmed. And so I really feel that you need to be proactive, but at the same time, respectful towards them.
And I want to expand on that. You and I both work with public healthcare workers all the time. The vast majority of them are excellent, doing the best they can with sometimes the very limited resources that they have to be able to help families. So how can we prevent our role of a caregiver becoming overwhelming in caring for our loved ones and in terms of navigating that difficult healthcare system?
Well, I think it's important to, I feel that, I've been a caregiver, but I've also been a patient. I'm a patient. I've had cardiac issues most of my life. And I think it's important to ask questions. A lot of people make the mistake of going to a doctor and not being prepared. And I think you really need to ask the questions. You need to become educated. You want to be one step ahead. So, for example, even, when I talk about families that are dealing with dementia, if a person is in the first stage, you want to know what's coming up, right? You want to understand as much as possible what are those resources. Don't wait till they get to that stage. Like, the more that you can plan ahead and be proactive, I keep using that word, but it's so true. It will help. It won't help lessen the sadness, but it will reduce the stress, because stress comes from really not understanding how to access the support or understanding the disease itself.
Knowledge is power, and I think that's the fear with a lot of people because of the lack of knowledge. You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here. I'm talking with caregiving specialist Claire Webster. Just before we head out to traffic, Claire, there are individuals just beginning their caregiving journey. Like you mentioned, some might not even realize they are considered a caregiver, but really taking care of a child, a spouse, a mom, you could be in that caregiver role. So knowing what you know now, what advice can you give to caregivers?
Honestly, reach out for help as soon as possible. I remember when I was caring for my mom and I had all these young children, and I'd even have friends that would offer to pick up the kids from school, and I was always saying no. I was always saying, "That's okay, I could do it myself. No, thank you." It's important to accept help, right? And give yourself permission to take a little bit of breaks. I think probably the most important lesson I learned is that guilt serves no purpose, right? I was always feeling guilty. And at the end, that emotion of feeling guilt was hurting me more than it was hurting anybody else. Because if you stay in a place of guilt, sometimes guilt will prevent you from seeking the necessary support that you need to help you take care of other people.
Guilt is very, very much part of our world, and I think it's a generational thing as well. Our parents took good care of us. Now the expectation is that we need to take care of our parents or our spouse, and guilt is a huge factor in that. And you bring up a good point, because it could be toxic. It could really drain you, and it's not easy. I'm not saying it's because that guilt will be there, but
no. And I think one of the biggest limitations is that the caregivers don't recognize their own boundaries, their own limitations.
Yeah, set those boundaries. Absolutely right, Claire. We have to head out to traffic. When we come back, you're going to stick around with us, are you? And we're going to talk a little bit more about self-care. And you are the founder of the McGill Dementia Education Program. Such an incredible program. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But first, we're going to head out to the CJD Traffic Center, and we're going to hear from Robin Flynn.
Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, talking with caregiving specialist Claire Webster. A little tribute to Miles Goodwin, as you might have heard at the 4 o'clock news with Tom Whalen. Miles Goodwin passed away today at the age of 75 years old. So a little tribute to Miles and April Wine. All right, Claire, just before traffic, it's so much and important advice for caregivers. Most of the time, as we explained, you're in this role and it sort of creeps up on you. And as you experience firsthand, it can become overwhelming and it can be very, very challenging for caregivers, extended family, your own family. And you're a big proponent of self-care. So I'd like you to expand a little bit on that.
So one of the first things I say to families that when I work with them is really, if they're really feeling overwhelmed, I ask the question, what can you let go of? Okay. So who are the people, commitments that are currently in your life that are maybe not bringing you the positive satisfaction that you need? The ones that if you get that email or that request from a friend or anything where you go, oh no, I just can't do it, right? So because the caregiving role requires so much time and effort and energy, you have to clear your own space, right? So many people have a hard time saying no to things. And so I suffered a burnout as a caregiver, and I really had to do a triage of my life and look at the people commitments that were adding positive value to my life and those that were taking like sucking up my energy, right? And I live by that mandate to this day. I really try to surround myself with things that feel good and let go of what doesn't, right? But people have a hard time. So you're trying to be a caregiver, you're trying to take care of your kids, an aging parent, and you're still trying to say yes to every single thing that comes your way. So you have to become selfish and really become choosy of what works and what doesn't work.
Great words of advice, and speaking from experience, because you have to put in those boundaries. And we talked before about the guilt that will creep in, and self-care is crucial. I guess we could use that analogy of the oxygen mask in the airplane, right? You need to put that oxygen mask on you first. Claire, I want to bring up, it's quite amazing really what you've done over the last few years, I guess last 7 years, going from a caregiver, severe burnout, having a real tough time, and saying, you know what, you can make a difference in people's lives based on your experience. And you are, you're just not talking the talk, you're walking the walk, Claire. And so you are the founder and ambassador of the McGill Dementia Education Program. It's one of the country's leading resources for caregivers. Can you tell us about some of these resources available to the public, many of which are free?
Yeah, they're all free. I'm so proud to be working with McGill University. And, and I didn't even attend McGill. They just were so proud to support me on this journey. So one of our most important resources, if people go to mcgill.ca/dementia, is we have a dementia companion guide that is available in over 10 different languages. People could download it for free, and it was spearheaded by my colleague, Dr. Serge Gauthier, a world-renowned neurologist, myself, Dr. José Moret, and the McGill School of Physical and Occupational Therapy and School of Social Work. I mean, it's a really multidisciplinary approach, but it's there to really support families who are caring for a person living with dementia. It's currently distributed throughout many of the memory clinics in Montreal. So that's one resource. We also have, I've produced over 100 McGill Cares webcasts that with all kinds of leading healthcare experts. Matt, you've been my guest many times as well. We have a dementia activity booklet with over 40 different types of leisure and recreational activities, which we are in the process of converting into video capsules that will be launched in this year. And we also have virtual support groups that anybody can join in partnership with Alzheimer's Society in Montreal. We have support groups for spouses and grown children. We just added on a new support group for young caregivers in partnership with the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging. And for those people that know Lucy Baralick and Joanne Besner, we have an amazing program called Caring Conversations, which is a very interactive type of support. So please go. We've created all of these resources thanks to so many of our donors. It's really all these resources are there in English and French and other languages to support caregivers, which are free.
And we're going to get that website out in just a couple of minutes. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio here with caregiving specialist Claire Webster. Just done a ton of work. Love that McGill Dementia Guide. 10 languages and increasing. Your McGill Cares pockets, over 100 of them, those webinars. All types of guests, not just dementia related, just all types of caregiving. And McGill Cares, it's cares, and you've got great guests on that as well. We got about another minute or two. I do want to, you also talk, you do a lot of presentations. I really like what you have to say to help prepare caregivers, individuals, if you've got to go on a doctor's visit with your loved one. It's stressful enough, and certainly if there's physical or cognitive issues that you're dealing with, and then you got to get to the appointment. So what should be done to prepare for an appointment for a doctor?
So arrive prepared. I mean, what's really important that people have to understand is dementia causes another illness called anosognosia, or loss of insight. So sometimes it's very difficult to get a loved one to that medical appointment. So I highly recommend that prior to the medical appointment, if you could get to that healthcare professional or to the nurse or the coordinator your concerns, a list of symptoms, so that you're not sitting in front of that loved one and talking about them. But the biggest point is to arrive prepared. Arrive with their list of medications, all their list of symptoms, audio and visual aids, your questions, because most of the time you only have between 10 and 15 minutes in that doctor's appointment, and it goes by so quickly. So it's about being prepared. Don't just expect that the doctor to be able to read your minds and figure it out. But the more information that you can provide the doctor, it really, really helps with an assessment.
And I like the fact about putting those questions down in writing. So many times we've talked to caregivers and they're driving home from that appointment. Oh, I forgot to ask this or that. Just put it in writing, get it there, and that way you won't forget those crucial questions. We have just about a minute left. I'm completely switching gears here on you, Claire. Not only do we have a passion for helping older adults and seniors, but we're also Great Dane lovers. I hear on my show very often, our listeners probably heard about my Zola, and Stephanie and I are just, we don't know what we do without our Zola. And you are also a Great Dane lover with Blue, correct?
Blue,
how's Blue doing?
Blue's almost 18 months old. She's probably close to 140 pounds, and she's changed our life completely. I mean, she's completely in love with my husband, Stuart. He's got a big beard, so I think maybe sometimes I think maybe she thinks you're one of her, but she's just really, I mean, owning a Great Dane, there's nothing like it. So
they are special. And for those dog lovers out there, for sure, Danes are certainly a special breed. Claire, thank you so much for coming into studio here on a very snowy Sunday. I want to thank you. And how can our listeners find out a little bit more about yourself and the McGill Dementia Education Program?
Sure. So you can either go to carecrosswalk.com. So that's my private practice as a dementia care educator and consultant. You can also go to mcgill.ca/dementia for all the great free resources from McGill. And really, you can email me at claire@carecrosswalk.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find me there.
Love it. carecrosswalk.com. And of course, McGill.ca with the Dementia Guide. Just fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Next up on Life Unrehearsed, you don't want to miss my upcoming interview with an Israeli social worker who was on the front lines on October 7th in the makeshift morgue. Ex-Montrealer Joy Frankel will be joining me. That's coming up after a CTV News update.
Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, specializing in downsizing and senior living. Welcome back. We are having trouble connecting with Joy Frankel. She's a clinical social worker, ex-Montrealer, and she has been on the front lines in Israel, and we are still going to try to connect with her. In the meantime, Claire Webster, who we just heard, has graciously agreed to hang around. And Claire, while we wait for Joy to connect here, we're going to continue our conversation. And we were just talking off air, one of the things that you see a lot, and by the way, Claire Webster is a caregiving specialist, if you're just joining us here, and offering great words of advice for those that are in the role of caregiver, whether for your children, your spouse, you're an adult child taking care of mom or dad. And one of the things that you and I both see quite often is, when is it time to feel that, okay, it might be time to move to the next level of a transition. It might become too much. We love our loved ones. And when you see something like that, how do you have, those are tough conversations, right, with a spouse or adult children. So what words of recommendation could you have?
Well, a lot of times, I mean, we see especially older caregivers, where it just becomes not possible to physically care for a person, whether they're living with dementia or other health needs. You know, if you've got a spouse who's in their 80s and they're caring for somebody who's also in their 80s, and it gets to a point where it becomes too physically demanding when you have to start doing transfers for example, helping the person go to the washroom, get into a shower, help change them, the lifting, could become too demanding. At times it could be because they find the caregiver isn't sleeping anymore. There could be sometimes signs of verbal abuse, or sometimes, depending what type of illness you're dealing with. In some cases with these neurocognitive issues, caregivers could become physically abused. So, so we're always concerned about looking after the safety of the person who's living with the illness, but it's also important to consider the safety and well-being of the care partner. And it comes to a point where maybe they just can't do it on their own. Now, not everybody, most people want to live at home as long as possible, but even home care support may not be enough at that stage.
Certainly, that's a very important point. We're seeing, everyone wants to stay at home as long as they possibly can. That's only normal. And it's when you get to this gray area where it becomes difficult. Sometimes there's what we call trigger events, right? A hospitalization, a slip or a fall, perhaps a broken hip, or it's something physical. Or on the cognitive side, maybe there's signs of aggressiveness. It's a terrible disease, as you see firsthand, and is someone at risk in their safety, or safety from a physical standpoint. You need to help transfer your spouse or your parent, and it's becoming too much for yourself to be able to do that. So these are the times that you have to start looking at perhaps alternatives. Home care, if we could try to get some support at home, that's obviously where we first want to start with your CLSC. There are private home care companies as well. There's certainly a cost to that, but try to arm yourself with some support at home, and try to make a go of it that way, but also be realistic about your situation as well, that maybe it's becoming too much.
Like I like to tell families, in life we have a plan A, but you always need a plan B. And I think that's what we learned from COVID, right? Is that you need a plan B. And, when I work with families, that they say, well, my mother, my father, my husband or wife made me promise or swear that we would never transition them to a residence, right? But sometimes it's very hard to hold on to that promise. And what happens if the primary caregiver, who's oftentimes the spouse, the healthy spouse, what happens if something happens to them, right? Are the grown-up children able to come in and step in? Oftentimes the grown-up children live out of the province, live out of the country. Sometimes the illness it's just become too much, right? And, when we look at, for example, dementia, as the disease progresses, it becomes so much harder on the family members to witness than it is on the person. Because as the disease evolves, the person who has that illness is becoming less and less aware. But as a family, you're witnessing all the cognitive and physical changes, right? And so it's really important to recognize your boundaries as a caregiver. Like, how much can you take on, right?
And you're talking with Claire Webster here, caregiving specialist here on Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio. You're bringing up a good point. And also, if I could just allow to talk a little bit about the legal side of things, because you're talking about adult children. These are tough conversations and essential conversations where it's usually, it's okay, we'll deal with it at another time. And we're constantly talking about having those protection mandates in place, or power of attorney. Usually it's the same document. At the very least, get a will in place, and sometimes they get confusing. Will, it truly is, if you die, this is the direction you want to go. However, most of the family challenges happen while you're alive, and this is where powers of attorneys and protection mandates come into place. So if you're not sure about it, reach out to a friend, reach out to a notary that you've had that did your will, because what you don't want is the government making decisions on your behalf, when in fact it should be family members, mandatories, to make these decisions as well. Claire, I quickly want to get into, and you see this as well, we talked a little bit about it, is the guilt. And this is probably the biggest challenge we see, because it's difficult. There's no easy answers with guilt. And I always like to say, just like you're talking about beforehand, how do we deal with guilt? And sometimes you really do need to step back to realize your situation to help you deal with that guilt.
Well, I think we totally underestimate ourselves. We don't appreciate how hard we're all trying. I looked at myself and I was trying to be superwoman. I was trying to be the best mother, best wife, best friend. And I suffered from that never enough syndrome, right? And the families that I work with, they are really doing their best to take care, but they feel guilty. They feel guilty for going out for dinner with friends if their husband or wife is not able to. They feel guilty because they haven't gone and visited their husband or wife or mother, father every day. And it's really about giving yourself permission to have a life. You need to have a break. You need to take respite. And if you don't give yourself a break, besides guilt, the other emotion that many people suffer from is anger. You become extremely angry. You become angry towards the disease. You become angry towards your family member because it feels like it's a burden, right? And so as human beings, we're never enough, right? We always feel we're never enough, but we are enough, right? And so if you continuously feel this guilt, it eventually turns into anger, right? And that's an emotion that family caregivers don't want to admit, but it's just something that becomes very common.
It's pent up a lot of the times, and then usually with that anger, eventually it has to get out. And what happens, you take it out on perhaps other family members, you take it out on yourself, you take it out on, God forbid, on the person you're caring for. And there's no doubt about it. And anger, I think, is just also a result of what we were talking about before, perhaps lack of knowledge, increasing those anxiety levels because you're not getting the answers you need, or you just don't know where to turn. And sometimes if you can educate yourself, use those resources, I think you'll see that the anxiety levels, and in turn that anger, would subdue a little bit.
Well, I also tell family members that oftentimes their guilt will prevent them from getting that next level of care, right? If you're in a state of guilt or in a state of denial, you're not moving forward to the next step. You may be preventing your loved one from having a safer environment, from having the proper care that they need, because you feel so guilty about having some home care support or considering transition. So you could even be risking their safety as well as your own health and well-being at the same time.
Absolutely. Claire, thank you for sticking around, and I'm glad you did. There was such good information here. We are still having trouble reaching our clinical social worker based in Israel. This is just an incredible story, so we are going to try to get Joy Frankel back on the show. We'll keep our listeners up to date there. Coming up after our traffic update, we're going to be talking to Mike Grenier. He's the executive director of A Horsetail Rescue, a really feel-good story about what they're doing and helping horses that are in retirement, if you will. So first, let's head out to the CJD Traffic Center. We're going to hear from Robin Flynn.